It was just another boring Tuesday night in August 2019. Jake Thompson was driving his old pickup truck down the empty highway after finishing his shift at the auto repair shop. The 28-year-old had been working late again, trying to save up enough money to finally move out of his tiny apartment. The radio was playing some old country song, and Jake was thinking about grabbing a burger on his way home when something strange happened. His truck just died. Not slowly, not with any warning signs, it just stopped working completely. The engine went quiet, the headlights went out, and even his phone screen went black. "What the heck?" Jake said to himself, pulling over to the side of the road. He'd been fixing cars for 10 years, but he'd never seen anything like this. It was like someone had just turned off a switch and killed all the power at once. He got out of the truck and popped the hood, using his flashlight to look at the engine. Everything looked normal. The battery connections were tight, the belts were fine, and there was no smell of burnt wires or anything else wrong. It was like the truck had just decided to take a nap. That's when he noticed how quiet everything was. Usually you could hear crickets or owls or at least some wind blowing through the trees. But tonight, there was nothing. Complete silence. Even the air felt different, like right before a big storm hits. Jake was about to call his buddy Tom for a ride when he saw the light. At first, he thought it might be a helicopter or maybe a plane flying really low. But this light was different. It was bright blue, almost like looking at a piece of the sky during the day, and it was coming straight down from above. His first thought was to run. Every scary movie he'd ever watched told him to get away from the mysterious light, but his feet felt like they were stuck in concrete. He couldn't move, couldn't look away, couldn't even blink. The light got brighter and brighter until it felt like standing inside a giant light bulb. Then she appeared. Jake had seen plenty of beautiful women in his life, but this was something completely different. She seemed to glow from the inside, like she had her own personal spotlight built in. Her skin looked smooth as glass, and her eyes were the strangest color he'd ever seen, somewhere between silver and gold, like looking at the sun reflecting off water. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, and moved like she was floating instead of walking. Her hair seemed to move on its own, even though there was no wind. And when she looked at him, Jake felt like she could see right through him, like she knew every thought he'd ever had. "Do not be afraid," she said. But her lips didn't move. The words just appeared in his head, clear as if someone was talking right next to his ear. "I am Zara. I come from far beyond your world." Jake tried to speak, but no sound came out. His mouth felt dry as sand, and his heart was beating so fast he thought it might explode. This had to be a dream. Or maybe he'd fallen asleep in his truck and hit his head or something. "This is real," Zara said, somehow reading his thoughts. "Your mind is struggling to understand what you see, but I promise you are safe." She stepped closer, and Jake noticed that her feet didn't quite touch the ground. She was definitely floating, just a few inches above the pavement. Up close, he could see that her skin wasn't just glowing. There were tiny sparkles moving under the surface, like she was made of liquid starlight. "Why me?" Jake finally managed to whisper. "Your kind calls it fate," Zara replied. "But we understand it as compatibility. Not all humans can connect with our people. You are special, Jake Thompson, though you do not know it yet." The fact that she knew his name should have scared him more, but somehow it didn't. Instead, he felt calm for the first time since the light appeared. There was something about her presence that made him feel safe, like being wrapped in a warm blanket on a cold night. "Where are you from?" he asked. Instead of answering with words, Zara touched his forehead gently with one finger. Suddenly, Jake's mind was filled with images he couldn't have imagined in a million years. He saw worlds with purple skies and silver trees, cities that floated in space like giant soap bubbles, and beings of light dancing among the stars. "We call ourselves the ethereal," she explained. "We travel between worlds, seeking those who can bridge the gap between different forms of life. You have something rare, Jake, a soul that can connect to ours." The next thing Jake knew, he was walking toward a craft that seemed to be made of the same blue light that had brought her down. It was hard to tell where the light ended and the solid parts began. Everything seemed to shift and flow like water, but held its shape like metal. Inside, the walls pulsed with soft, warm light. There were no sharp corners or hard edges anywhere. Everything curved and flowed together like the inside of a seashell. Jake felt like he was inside a living thing rather than a machine. "Your technology is so different from ours," he said, running, his hand along what might have been a wall or a control panel. "We do not build machines," Zara explained. "We grow them. Everything you see is alive in its own way, responding to our thoughts and needs." Time seemed to work differently inside the craft. Jake felt like he'd been there for hours, learning about Zara's people and their incredible journey across the galaxy. She showed him star maps made of pure light and told him stories about worlds where music could heal injuries and love could literally move mountains. But she also explained something that made his heart race. Her people were dying out, not from disease or war, but from loneliness. They'd become so advanced that they'd lost the ability to feel the simple emotions that made life worth living. That's why they searched for compatible humans, to remember what it meant to truly feel alive. "We need what you have," she said, placing her hand over his heart. "The fire that burns inside humanity, the passion that drives you to create and love and fight for what matters." What happened next was impossible to put into words. It wasn't just about attraction or romance, though those feelings were there too. It was like their souls reached out and touched each other, sharing everything they were and everything they'd ever been. Jake felt her centuries of loneliness, her desperate hope to save her people, and her amazement at the intensity of human emotion. In return, she experienced his simple but powerful love for his family, his pride in honest work, and his dreams of building something meaningful with his life. For the first time in ages, Zara understood what it meant to hope for tomorrow. When Jake woke up the next morning, he was lying beside his truck on the highway. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. His truck started on the first try, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. For a moment, he wondered if the whole thing had been the most vivid dream of his life. But then he looked down at his wrist and saw it, a small mark that seemed to shimmer and pulse with its own inner light. It was shaped like a star, but not quite like any star he'd ever seen, more like the way starlight looks when it hits water. As he drove home, Jake kept touching the mark and thinking about Zara. Part of him wanted to turn around and drive back to the spot where his truck had died, hoping she might return. But somehow, he knew that wasn't how it worked. She'd find him again when the time was right. He had no idea that the right time would be almost 3 years later, and that when Zara returned, she wouldn't be alone. Jake tried his best to go back to normal life, but nothing felt the same anymore. Every morning when he woke up, he'd check his wrist to see if the strange mark was still there. It always was, glowing faintly, like a tiny nightlight under his skin. He started wearing long sleeves to work even when it was hot outside because he didn't want anyone asking questions he couldn't answer. The first few weeks were the hardest. Jake kept expecting Zara to come back, checking the sky every night for that beautiful blue light. He'd drive the same route home from work, hoping his truck would break down again in the exact same spot. But the highway stayed empty and his truck ran perfectly fine. His co-workers at the auto shop started noticing changes in him. "You feeling okay, Jake?" asked his boss, Mr. Peterson, one afternoon. "You seem different lately, kind of distracted." Jake just shrugged and went back to fixing the engine he was working on. How could he explain that he'd spent a night with a being from another world? How could he tell anyone that he'd seen cities floating in space and felt what it was like to connect with someone on a level he didn't even know existed? The dream started about a month after the encounter. At first, they were beautiful. Jake would find himself back on Zara's craft, surrounded by that warm, pulsing light. He'd see those incredible worlds she'd shown him, with their purple skies and silver trees. Sometimes he'd dream he was flying through space, visiting planets where the oceans were made of liquid crystal and the mountains sang songs that could heal broken hearts. But as time went on, the dreams became more intense. Jake would wake up with tears on his face, feeling like he'd lost something precious. He'd reach for his phone to call someone, but then remember there was no phone number for another dimension. The loneliness was unlike anything he'd ever felt before. His little sister Amy noticed the change when he came over for Sunday dinner at his parents' house. "You look tired, Jake," she said, passing him the mashed potatoes. Are you getting enough sleep? I'm fine, he lied, avoiding her eyes. Amy had always been good at reading people, and Jake didn't want her digging deeper into what was bothering him. Maybe you should get out more, suggested his mom. When's the last time you went on a date? That nice girl from the coffee shop has been asking about you. Jake's mom had been trying to set him up with different women for years, but now the idea seemed impossible. How could he date anyone when his heart was still somewhere among the stars? How could he explain to someone that he'd experienced a connection so deep it made everything else feel shallow? But after 6 months of living, like a ghost, Jake decided he had to try. The mark on his wrist was fading, becoming less bright each day. Maybe that was a sign that it was time to move on, to accept that what happened with Zara was a once-in-a-lifetime experience that would never happen again. He met Lisa at a friend's barbecue. She was a teacher at the local elementary school. With kind eyes and a laugh that reminded him of sunshine, Lisa was everything a guy could want. Smart, funny, caring, and beautiful in a completely normal human way. She didn't glow or float or read his thoughts, but she made him feel comfortable in a way he'd almost forgotten was possible. Their first date was at a little Italian restaurant downtown. Lisa talked about her students and her plans to travel to Europe someday. Jake found himself actually listening, actually caring about what she was saying. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about Zara or wondering if he'd imagined the whole thing. You're a good listener, Lisa said over dessert. Most guys just wait for their turn to talk. Jake smiled. My sister always says I'm too quiet. She thinks I should talk more. I like quiet guys, Lisa said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. There's something mysterious about you, Jake Thompson. Like you've got secrets. If only she knew, Jake thought. But he just squeezed her hand and asked if she wanted to go see a movie next weekend. They started dating regularly. Lisa would come over to watch movies, and Jake would help her grade papers sometimes. She was patient with his moods, understanding when he seemed distant or distracted. Slowly, Jake began to feel like maybe he could have a normal life after all. One night, about a year after they'd started dating, Lisa stayed over at his apartment. Jake woke up in the middle of the night and found her sitting by the window looking up at the stars. Can't sleep? He asked, joining her on the small couch. I was just thinking, she said, leaning against his shoulder. Do you ever wonder if we're alone in the universe? Like, if there's other life out there? Jake's heart skipped a beat. What makes you ask that? I don't know. Sometimes I look at all those stars and think about how big everything is. It seems impossible that we'd be the only ones. She turned to look at him. Do you think there's life on other planets? Jake was quiet for a long moment. The mark on his wrist gave a tiny pulse, so faint he almost missed it. Yeah, he said finally, I think there probably is. What do you think they'd be like? Scary monsters like in the movies or something else? Something else, Jake said softly. I think they'd be beautiful, and maybe lonely, looking for connection just like we are. Lisa smiled and kissed his cheek. You're such a romantic, Jake Thompson. They moved in together after dating for a year and a half. Jake tried to be the best boyfriend he could be. He took Lisa on weekend trips, remembered her birthday, and even helped her paint her classroom during summer break. But sometimes, late at night when she was asleep beside him, he'd stare out the window at the stars and wonder if Zara was up there somewhere, thinking about him too. The dreams never completely stopped. They became less frequent, but they never went away entirely. Sometimes Jake would wake up feeling like he'd been somewhere else, somewhere important, but he could never quite remember where. The mark on his wrist was barely visible now, just a faint outline that you'd have to look really close to see. Lisa started talking about marriage and kids and buying a house together. Jake wanted to want those things, and part of him really did. Lisa was wonderful, and she deserved a man who could love her completely. But there was always this little voice in the back of his mind asking if this was really the life he was meant to live. One evening, almost 3 years after his encounter with Zara, Jake was grilling burgers in the backyard of the small house he and Lisa had rented together. She was inside watching TV, and he was enjoying the peaceful summer evening when something made him look up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter than usual, almost like they were trying to tell him something. Jake touched his wrist absently, feeling for the mark that was now almost completely gone. He'd convinced himself that maybe it had all been some kind of weird dream or hallucination, brought on by stress and too much overtime at the shop. But as he stood there flipping burgers and listening to Lisa laugh at something on television, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet, normal life was about to change forever. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, a familiar blue light would appear in his backyard, and this time, Zara wouldn't be alone. Jake was just about to flip the last burger when he saw it, that familiar blue light descending from the evening sky. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. After almost 3 years of wondering and waiting, it seemed too good to be true. His heart started pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The spatula slipped from his hand and clattered onto the patio stones. Inside the house, he could hear Lisa laughing at something on the cooking show she was watching, completely unaware that Jake's entire world was about to turn upside down again. The light grew brighter and brighter until it filled the entire backyard with that otherworldly glow he remembered so well. Jake stood frozen, not sure if he should run inside and hide or stay and face whatever was coming. Part of him had dreamed about this moment for 3 years, but now that it was actually happening, he felt terrified. Then she appeared, stepping out of the light like she was walking down invisible stairs. Zara looked exactly the same as she had that night on the highway. Tall, graceful, glowing with that inner light that made her seem like a living star. Her silver gold eyes found his immediately, and Jake felt that same electric connection he'd never been able to forget. "Hello, Jake," her voice whispered directly into his mind, warm and familiar. "I have returned." Jake opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. After 3 years of wondering if he'd imagined the whole thing, seeing her again felt like waking up from a long, confusing dream. The mark on his wrist, which had been barely visible for months, suddenly started glowing bright again. "I know this is unexpected," Zara continued, moving closer with that floating walk of hers. "But there is something important you must know, something that will change everything." That's when Jake noticed she wasn't alone. Beside her, partially, hidden behind her flowing robes, stood a small figure. At first, Jake thought it might be another member of Zara's people, maybe a child from her world. But as the little one stepped forward, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The child appeared to be about 2 years old, with the same luminescent skin as Zara, and eyes that sparkled with curiosity. But there was something achingly familiar about his face. The shape of his nose, the way his mouth curved when he smiled, even the stubborn cowlick in his hair. It was like looking at his own baby pictures. "This is Kale," Zara said softly, placing a protective hand on the child's shoulder. "He is the result of our connection 3 years ago. He is both of our worlds, Jake. He is your son." Jake's legs felt like they were going to give out. He grabbed the edge of the patio table to steady himself, staring at the impossible child who was looking back at him with such trust and innocence. That's not possible," he whispered. "Among my people, deep connections can create new life." Zara explained. "When 2 souls touch as deeply as ours did, when the bond is strong enough, it can result in something unprecedented. Kale is the first of his kind, part human, part ethereal." The little boy took a step toward Jake, tilting his head in a gesture that was so familiar it made Jake's heart ache. It was the same way Jake tilted his head when he was thinking hard about something, the same expression his sister Amy always teased him about. "Daddy?" Kyle said, the word forming not in sound but directly in Jake's mind, clear as a bell. "Are you my daddy?" Jake felt tears start to burn his eyes. Looking at this child was like seeing a part of himself he never knew existed. The resemblance was undeniable. This little boy had his chin, his eyebrows, even the same small scar on his forehead that Jake had gotten when he fell off his bike as a kid. "How?" Jake managed to ask. "How is this possible?" Zara's expression grew serious. "Your people do not yet understand the true nature of consciousness and connection. What you call love, we know as the fundamental force that binds all life together. When that force is strong enough, it can create miracles. Kyle let go of Zara's hand and walked over to Jake, moving with the same floating grace as his mother, but with a child's natural curiosity. He reached up and touched Jake's hand, and immediately Jake felt a flood of emotions and images, flashes of strange, beautiful worlds, the feeling of being loved and protected, and an overwhelming sense of longing. "He has been asking about you," Zara said, watching the interaction between father and son. "From the moment he could form thoughts, he has known he had a father on Earth. He dreams about you, Jake. He sees you in his mind." Jake knelt down to Kale's level, hardly believing what he was seeing. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. This child had inherited not just his physical features but also his mannerisms, the way he squinted slightly when concentrating, the way he chewed his bottom lip when thinking. "Hi there, little guy," Jake said softly, not sure if he should speak out loud or try to communicate the way Zara did. Kale's face lit up with a smile that was pure sunshine. "Daddy," he said again, this time with such joy that Jake felt his heart might burst. The child threw his small arms around Jake's neck, and Jake instinctively hugged him back. In that moment, holding his son for the first time, Jake felt a completeness he'd never experienced before. It was like a puzzle piece he didn't know was missing had finally clicked into place. This child, impossible as he was, belonged to him in a way that felt more real than anything else in his life. "Why now?" Jake asked Zara, still holding Kale close. "Why bring him here now?" Zara's expression grew troubled. "Kale is growing rapidly, and his abilities are becoming difficult to manage. He can manipulate energy, communicate across vast distances, and sometimes he phases between dimensions without meaning to. But more than that, he needs you, Jake. He needs the stability and grounding that only his human father can provide." "I don't understand," Jake said, though he was starting to. "My people are beings of pure energy and thought," Zara explained. "We have incredible powers, but we lack the emotional anchor that humans possess. Kale has inherited both our abilities and your capacity for deep feeling. Without proper guidance, without learning to balance both sides of his nature, he could become dangerous." Jake looked down at Kale, who was playing with the buttons on his shirt with the innocent fascination of any 2-year-old. It was hard to imagine this sweet child being dangerous to anyone. "What do you want from me?" Jake asked. "I want you to know your son," Zara said simply. "I want you to be part of his life, to help him understand his human heritage. But I also need you to understand that this cannot be simple. Kale exists between worlds, and so must any relationship you have with him." From inside the house, Jake heard Lisa call his name. "Jake? Is everything okay out there? I smell something burning." Jake looked back at the grill, where the forgotten burgers were now charcoal. Then he looked at Zara and Kale, his impossible family from the stars. His two worlds were about to collide, and he had no idea how to handle it. "I have to go," he whispered urgently. "She can't see you, she wouldn't understand." Zara nodded knowingly. "I will leave this with you," she said, pressing a small, smooth object into his hand. "When you are ready to see Kale again, hold this. And think of us, but Jake, you must decide quickly. Kyle needs his father, and time is running out." The blue light began to intensify again, and Jake felt panic rising in his chest. "Wait, when will I see him again?" "That is up to you," Zara said, already beginning to fade. "But know that every day you wait, Kale grows stronger and more unstable. He needs you, Jake Thompson. He needs his daddy." "Daddy," Kyle called out one more time, reaching for Jake as the light carried him away. "I love you, Daddy." Then they were gone, leaving Jake alone in his backyard with a handful of burnt burgers and a heart full of impossible love. The small device Zara had given him felt warm in Jake's pocket as he walked back into the house. Lisa was standing in the kitchen, looking concerned. "What happened out there?" she asked, noticing his pale face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jake forced a smile and tried to act normal. "Just burned the burgers. Got distracted thinking about work stuff. Maybe we should just order pizza instead." Lisa studied his face for a moment. She'd always been good at reading people, and Jake could tell she knew something was wrong, but she didn't push it, which he was grateful for. How could he possibly explain what had just happened? How could he tell the woman he lived with that he had a son with an alien being? For the next 3 days, Jake carried the device everywhere. He'd take it out when he was alone, turning it over in his hands and wondering if he'd imagined the whole thing. But every time he looked at it, he could feel a strange energy coming from it, almost like it was alive. The device looked like a smooth stone, about the size of a quarter, but it seemed to shift colors when he wasn't looking directly at it. Sometimes it appeared silver, sometimes gold, and sometimes it looked like it contained tiny stars swirling around inside. Jake couldn't stop thinking about Cale. The way the little boy had called him Daddy with such pure joy kept replaying in his mind. He'd catch himself staring at nothing during work, remembering the feel of small arms wrapped around his neck and the unmistakable family resemblance in those curious eyes. "You've been weird all week," his coworker Danny said on Friday afternoon. "What's going on with you, man?" "Nothing," Jake lied, tightening a bolt harder than necessary. "Just tired." But Danny was right. Jake couldn't concentrate on anything. He kept making mistakes at work, forgetting appointments, and barely listening when Lisa talked to him. The secret was eating him alive. Finally, on Saturday night when Lisa was at her book club, Jake couldn't take it anymore. He went out to the garage where he could be alone and pulled out the device. It felt warmer than usual in his palm. "Zara," he whispered, feeling foolish. "Can you hear me?" The device suddenly glowed bright, and Jake felt that familiar sensation of Zara's presence in his mind. "Jake." Her voice was filled with relief. "I was hoping you would reach out. Cale has been asking for you constantly." "Where are you?" Jake asked. "We exist in a space between dimensions," Zara explained. "A place where both our kinds can meet safely. If you wish to see Cale, I can bring you here, but only for a short time." Jake's heart raced. "Is it safe?" "Completely. But Jake, you must understand. If you choose to be part of Cale's life, it will require great sacrifice. You will have to live between two worlds, keeping secrets from those you love." Jake thought about Lisa, about the life they'd built together, about all the normal things he'd be giving up. But then he thought about Cale's smile and the way it felt to hold his son. "I want to see him," Jake said. The world around him began to shimmer and fade. Jake felt like he was floating through water made of starlight. When his vision cleared, he was standing in the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. It looked like a garden made of dreams. The ground beneath his feet felt soft as clouds, and the sky above swirled with colors that had no names. Flowers that looked like they were made of crystal chimed softly in a breeze that smelled like home and adventure all at once. "Daddy." Jake turned to see Cale running toward him, and his heart melted all over again. The little boy looked exactly the same as 3 days ago, but somehow Jake could sense he was different, older, more aware. "I missed you," Cale said, jumping into Jake's arms. "Mama said you might not come." "I'll always come," Jake heard himself say, and he meant it completely. "I'll always be here for you." Zara appeared beside them, smiling in a way that made Jake's chest tight with old feelings. "He has been practicing his English words," she said. "He wants to communicate with you the way humans do." "Daddy, look," Kyle said excitedly, holding out his small hand. A tiny ball of light appeared in his palm, dancing and spinning like a miniature star. "I can make light." Jake watched in amazement as his son played with energy like other kids played with toys. "That's incredible, buddy." "Can you make light too?" Cale asked innocently. "No, I can't do that," Jake said. "But I can teach you other things, human things." For the next hour, Jake experienced the strangest and most wonderful time of his life. He taught Kyle how to play patty cake, showed him how to whistle, and told him stories about Earth, about cars and ice cream and playgrounds. Kyle listened with wide eyes, absorbing everything like a sponge. "Tell me about dogs again," Kyle said, sitting in Jake's lap. "The furry friends that wag their tails." Jake laughed and described every dog he'd ever met, making Cale giggle with joy. It felt so natural, so right. Like this was what he'd been meant to do his whole life. but Zara's expression grew serious as time passed. Jake, we need to discuss Kale's future. His powers are growing stronger every day and he's becoming harder to control. What do you mean? Jake asked, still holding Kale close. Yesterday, when he became upset because you hadn't visited, he accidentally created a storm that lasted for hours, not here in this dimension but on 3 different planets across the galaxy. Jake looked down at his son, who was now making tiny lights dance between his fingers like fireflies. He did that? His emotions are incredibly powerful because of his human heritage, Zara explained. But without proper guidance, without learning to balance both sides of his nature, he could accidentally cause great harm. What can I do? I don't know anything about alien powers. You know about human feelings, Zara said. You know about love, responsibility, consequence. These are things my people have forgotten, but Kale needs to learn them. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about wanting to know his son. Kale actually needed him. Without Jake's help, the little boy might hurt people without meaning to. How often can I see him? Jake asked. Once every few weeks, when the barriers between dimensions are thinnest, but Jake? Zara hesitated. These visits will become harder to hide. Kale's connection to you is growing stronger, and it's starting to affect your world in small ways. What? Do you mean, have you noticed anything strange lately? Electronic devices acting unusual around you? Lights flickering when you're upset? Jake thought about it and realized she was right. His phone had been glitching all week, and the streetlight outside his house kept going out whenever he walked. Under it. That's Kale, Zara said. His love for you is so strong it's creating ripples across dimensions. The more time you spend together, the stronger this connection will become. Jake looked at his son, who had fallen asleep in his arms, tiny lights still sparkling around his fingers like a lullaby made of stars. How could something so beautiful and innocent be dangerous? Time grows short, Zara said sadly. You must return to your world now. But Jake, you need to decide soon how much you're willing to sacrifice for your son. Because loving Kale means choosing between the life you have and the life you never knew you wanted. As the garden began to fade around him, Jake made a promise to the sleeping child in his arms. Whatever it took, whatever he had to give up, he would be the father Kale needed, even if it meant losing everything else he'd ever cared about. When Jake opened his eyes, he was back in his garage holding the now dim device. Through the window, he could see Lisa's car pulling into the driveway. His 2 worlds were about to collide, and he still had no idea how to handle it. But one thing was certain. He was already completely, hopelessly in love with his impossible son, and there was no going back now. Over the next 6 months, Jake's life became a careful balancing act that grew harder every day. He visited Kale whenever the dimensional barriers were weak enough, which happened about once every 2 weeks. Each visit made their bond stronger, but it also made the secret heavier to carry. Kale was growing so fast it amazed Jake. The little boy who had barely spoken 6 months ago was now chatting constantly, asking endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how cars worked. But along with his growth came powers that were becoming impossible to ignore. During one visit, Kale got excited about a story Jake was telling and accidentally made every flower in their meeting garden bloom at once. During another, when Jake had to leave, Kale's tears created a rainstorm that Zara said lasted for 3 days on a planet halfway across the galaxy. He's getting stronger, Zara warned during their latest meeting. And his emotional connection to you is making it worse. Yesterday, when you were late getting home from work, every streetlight in your neighborhood went out at the same time. Jake had noticed that. Lisa had mentioned it too, wondering if there was some kind of power grid problem. Jake just nodded and changed the subject, but inside he was worried. How long before someone started asking questions he couldn't answer? The stress was taking its toll on his relationship with Lisa. She knew something was wrong, but couldn't figure out what. Jake had become distant, secretive, and often seemed lost in thought. He'd started making excuses to leave the house at odd hours, claiming he needed to run errands or check on things at the shop. Are you having an affair? Lisa asked him one evening, her voice quiet but direct. They were sitting on their couch, but it felt like they were miles apart. Jake's heart sank. In a way, she wasn't wrong. He was in love with someone else, just not in the way she thought. No, Lisa, I'm not seeing another woman. Then what is it? She demanded, tears starting to form in her eyes. You disappear for hours, you won't. Tell me where you go, and half the time you act like you're not even here when you are here. If it's not another woman, then what? Jake wanted so badly to tell her the truth. Lisa deserved better than lies and secrets. But how could he explain that he was visiting his son who lived in another dimension? How could he make her understand that he was falling more in love every day with a child who didn't technically exist in their world? I can't tell you, Jake said finally. I wish I could, but I can't. Lisa stared at him for a long moment, then got up and walked to their bedroom. Well, I can't live like this anymore, Jake. Whatever's going on with you, figure it out. Because I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't even know to what. That night, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling while Lisa slept as far away from him as possible on their bed. He knew she was right, he was losing her, and it was his own fault. But every time he thought about stopping the visits to see Cale, his heart felt like it was being torn in half. 3 days later, everything came to a head. Jake was at work when his phone started acting strange. It kept turning itself on and off, and when it was on, the screen showed swirling patterns of light instead of his normal home screen. Then the lights in the garage started flickering, and Danny's radio began picking up what sounded like music from another world. Dude, what is going on? Danny asked, looking around nervously as every electronic device in the shop started malfunctioning. Jake knew immediately what was happening. Something was wrong with Cale. He grabbed the dimensional device from his toolbox and rushed outside, not caring who saw him. Zara! He called out desperately. What's happening? The device glowed brighter than it ever had before, and suddenly Jake was pulled into the dimensional space without warning. When he arrived, he found chaos. The beautiful garden was being torn apart by waves of energy, and at the center of it, all was Cale crying and glowing so bright it hurt to look at him. Jake! Zara called out over the storm. He had a nightmare about losing you. His fear is tearing apart the barriers between worlds. Jake ran toward his son, dodging flying rocks and bursts of wild energy. Kyle, Daddy's here! The moment Cale saw him, the chaos began to calm. The little boy threw himself into Jake's arms, sobbing. Daddy, I dreamed you went away forever. I dreamed you didn't love me anymore. That will never happen, Jake said, holding him tight. I will always love you, no matter what. But Zara's expression was grim. Jake, this cannot continue. Cale's connection to you is becoming too powerful. His emotions are starting to affect multiple dimensions simultaneously. If this keeps up, he could accidentally destroy entire worlds. Jake felt like the ground was falling out from under him. What are you saying? I'm saying you have to make a choice, Zara said sadly. Either you come with us permanently, helping to raise Cale and control his powers, or we have to sever the connection completely to protect both our worlds. Sever the connection? Jake's heart stopped. You mean I'd never see him again? It would be as if none of this ever happened. Cale would forget you and you would forget him. The memories would fade like a dream. Jake looked down at Cale, who was still clinging to him like he'd never let go. The thought of forgetting this perfect little boy, of losing the love that had become the most important thing in his life, was unbearable. But if I come with you, I can never go back. Never, Zara confirmed. You would live among our people, helping us understand human emotions while helping Cale control his powers. But you could never return to Earth, never see your family, or Lisa again. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the most impossible decision anyone had ever faced. On one hand was the life he'd built, his job, his family, Lisa, everything normal and safe and predictable. On the other hand was his son, who needed him desperately, and a love deeper than anything he'd ever imagined possible. How long do I have to decide? Jake asked. The next dimensional alignment happens in 3 days, Zara said. If you choose to come with us, it must be then. After that, The barriers will be too strong to cross safely. Jake spent those 3 days in agony. He went through the motions of normal life, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Lisa tried to talk to him several times, but he barely heard her. How could he focus on everyday problems when he was facing a choice that would determine the rest of his life? On the final night, Lisa packed a suitcase. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," she said, not looking at him. "Whatever's wrong with you, Jake, I hope you figure it out. But I can't watch you disappear right in front of me anymore." After she left, Jake sat alone in their empty house, holding the dimensional device and thinking about everything he was about to lose. But then he thought about Cale's smile, about the way his son's eyes lit up whenever he saw him, about the incredible love that had changed his life forever. Some choices weren't really choices at all. The next morning, Jake wrote a letter to his family explaining that he had to go away for a while and couldn't tell them where. He quit his job, sold his truck, and donated most of his belongings to charity. Then he walked out to the backyard where it all began and activated the device one final time. When the blue light came for him, Jake stepped into it without looking back. As he felt himself being pulled toward the stars, toward his son and a life beyond anything he could have imagined, Jake realized he wasn't losing everything after all. He was finally coming home.